Evan Carter had ridden that same stretch of Maple Road 1,000 times. But on this late autumn afternoon, the air felt unusually still. Too still. As he slowed near the tree line, a sound slipped through the quiet. At first he thought it was the wind brushing the branches, but then it came again. A small, breaking voice. A child's voice. A sob. Evan killed the engine. Silence dropped heavy, the kind that prickled the skin. Then he heard it clearly, a choked cry, desperate, trembling. He followed it down a narrow path, boots crunching over dry leaves, until he spotted her, a little girl curled at the base of an oak tree, arms wrapped around her knees, as if trying to disappear. Her face was blotchy from crying. Her hands shook. She didn't seem hurt, but she looked terrified of something. Someone. Evan crouched down, softening his voice. "Hey, sweetheart, are you lost?" The girl flinched, as if even gentle words caused fear. She glanced over her shoulder toward the massive Whitmore estate just beyond the woods. Her lips trembled. Don't let her take me back," she whispered. Evan felt a jolt run through him. "Who? Are you in danger?" But before she could answer, hurried footsteps cracked through the brush. A woman stepped out, poised, elegant, dressed far too richly for a walk in the woods. Lorraine Whitmore. Her smile was perfect, polished, and wrong. "Oh dear," she said lightly, gripping the girl's arm a little too tightly. "Harper tends to exaggerate when she's emotional. Thank you, but we'll take it from here." Harper's eyes begged for help, and for the first time Evan saw something cold flicker behind Lorraine's smile, something that made his stomach twist. And then she said something that made Evan realize this wasn't a simple misunderstanding at all. Harper Whitmore had learned to stay quiet long before Evan ever heard her cry in the woods. At just 8 years old, she understood things no child should ever have to understand. How to read the mood in a room before stepping inside, how to keep her voice small enough not to draw attention, and how to make herself invisible when the wrong person walked through the door. Before her mother passed, Harper had been a bright child, always humming little tunes and carrying crayons in her pockets. But after her father remarried, the house changed. The light felt colder, the halls echoed differently, and Harper learned that smiles could be masks. When Charles Whitmore was home, things seemed normal enough. Lorraine behaved like the perfect wife, keeping everything pristine and elegant. She brushed Harper's hair for show, corrected her posture gently, and made sure Charles saw only calm, orderly scenes. But the moment he left on another business trip, as he often did, Harper felt the air shift, as though the whole house tightened around her. Lorraine's voice changed first. It turned sharp, impatient, clipped. She didn't yell, she didn't need to. Her silence was louder than shouting, her stare colder than any winter outside. Harper tried to be perfect. She did chores exactly how she was told. She stayed in her room. She avoided any mistake that could disappoint Lorraine. But perfection didn't matter. Some days Lorraine was fine. Some days she wasn't. Harper never knew which version she would get, and that uncertainty became its own kind of fear. The girl's only comfort was the small patch of woods behind the estate, a place she could hide even for a few minutes without feeling watched. Her mother used to take her there. Sometimes Harper imagined she could still hear her mother's voice in the breeze. That afternoon, hours before Evan stopped his motorcycle, Harper slipped out the back door during one of Lorraine's silent moods. She had only meant to sit by the oak tree until she felt steady again, but thoughts tangled in her chest, too heavy for her small body to hold. That's when the tears came, first quietly, then in waves she couldn't stop. She didn't expect anyone to hear her. She hoped no one would. But when she looked up and saw a stranger kneeling in front of her, a man with gentle eyes and a warm voice, she felt something unfamiliar. Relief. For a moment, Harper thought maybe someone finally noticed her. But the sound of hurried footsteps behind her reminded her why she never allowed herself to hope. And the way Lorraine grabbed her arm next would tell Evan everything he needed to know. Cedar Valley looked peaceful from the outside. White fences, freshly painted porches, flower baskets hanging from street lamps. It was the kind of town people described as quiet and wholesome, the type of place where neighbors waved from their driveways and kids rode bicycles to the corner store. But beneath that postcard charm was a truth everyone knew, yet no one dared to say aloud. Power decided everything here. And no one held more power than the Whitmore family. Their estate sat on a hill overlooking the town like a mansion from another world. Stone pillars, polished marble steps, a fountain that sparkled even on cloudy days. Charles Whitmore, respected businessman and generous donor, had built an image so spotless that people forgot to question anything about the family behind the gates. Lorraine made sure of that. Whenever the town hosted galas, charity dinners, or holiday events, Lorraine appeared as the flawless hostess, elegant dress, perfect smile, soft voice that charmed every room she entered. She knew exactly how to tilt her head, how to greet each person by name, how to keep her reputation shining brighter than the crystal chandeliers above her. No one ever imagined there could be darkness inside a home that beautiful. Meanwhile, Evan Carter lived a world away, even though it was only a 15-minute ride from his small mechanic shop to the Whitmore mansion. His place smelled of engine oil and old wood. He fixed bikes, tuned engines, and worked with his hands. No fancy suits, no gala invitations, just a modest garage with peeling paint and a coffee maker that rattled every morning. Yet somehow, that afternoon by the woods pulled both worlds together. After Lorraine dragged Harper away, Evan stood alone under the oak trees, unsettled by what he had witnessed. Most people would have shrugged it off. Whitmore business wasn't something ordinary residents got involved in. That was the unspoken rule of Cedar Valley. But as Evan drove past the estate later that evening, he saw something that made his jaw tighten. Through the tall windows, Lorraine stood in the brightly lit kitchen. She wasn't graceful now. She wasn't smiling. Her posture was rigid, her hand gripping Harper's shoulder as she bent down to speak into the girl's ear. Harper didn't move. She just stared at the floor. Evan slowed his bike. Something inside him, something he'd ignored for far too long, stirred. Two worlds weren't just colliding anymore. One was swallowing the other whole. And Evan didn't know it yet. But what he saw that night would push him deeper into a storm no one in Cedar Valley was prepared for. For most people in Cedar Valley, Lorraine Whitmore was untouchable, an icon of grace, charity, and refinement. But for Harper, she was something entirely different. And for the first time, Evan was beginning to see that difference with terrifying clarity. After what he witnessed through the Whitmore kitchen window, Evan couldn't shake the image from his mind. Harper's stillness, Lorraine's tight grip, the way the girl seemed to shrink into herself, as if her very presence offended the woman standing over her. The next morning, Evan showed up at his shop early, hoping a day of work would quiet his thoughts. It didn't. Every sound, every turn of a wrench reminded him of Harper's trembling voice in the woods. His conscience gnawed at him. He had ignored warning signs in the past, signs that cost someone he loved dearly. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. Meanwhile, inside the Whitmore mansion, Harper tiptoed through her morning routine. She chose her clothes quietly, folded her blankets perfectly, and avoided any sound that might draw Lorraine's attention. Children shouldn't have to live like that, measuring every breath, fearing every footstep, but Lorraine noticed everything. At breakfast, she watched Harper stir her cereal without eating. "Charles will be home in 2 days," Lorraine said coolly, slicing her fruit with slow precision. "You don't want him thinking you're being dramatic again, do you?" Harper shook her head quickly. That was enough to keep her silent for the rest of the meal. Later that afternoon, Evan decided he couldn't stay quiet. He drove toward the Whitmore estate, unsure what he would say, but certain he needed to say something. At the gate, he spotted Lorraine walking to her car dressed elegantly as always, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Whitmore," Evan called out. Lorraine stopped, slowly turned. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice smooth but distant. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Evan said. "It's about Harper. I'm concerned." The smile she offered was thin, almost brittle. "Concerned?" she repeated. "Children cry, Mr. Carter. They get emotional. Surely you've seen that before." "That wasn't normal crying," Evan replied, steady. She was terrified. "And I saw you last night. She looked scared in her own home." For a split second, something sharp flashed in Lorraine's eyes, but it vanished behind another practiced smile. "You're overstepping," she said quietly, "and you should be very careful about misinterpreting what you don't understand." The warning in her tone wasn't subtle. As she stepped into her car, she added, "People in this town trust my family. They won't take kindly to baseless accusations." Then she drove off, leaving Evan standing at the gate, heart pounding. He didn't know it yet, but Lorraine had just taken his concern as a threat. And she was a woman who destroyed threats without hesitation. The next few days in Cedar Valley felt unusually tense for Evan Carter, though nothing obvious had happened, at least not yet. What Evan didn't realize was that Lorraine Whitmore had wasted no time turning the town subtly, quietly, skillfully against him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make threats. She simply shifted the story. And in a place like Cedar Valley, stories traveled fast. At the grocery store, a woman Evan barely knew avoided eye contact. At the gas station, 2 men whispered as he passed. When he returned to his shop, an elderly customer canceled her appointment, saying her family recommended someone more reliable. It was polite language for something far sharper. By midday, Evan understood. Lorraine had started a campaign, not with confrontation, but with whispers sharp enough to cut. Meanwhile, inside the Whitmore home, Harper sat at the dining table tracing circles on a napkin, while Lorraine spoke on the phone in the next room. Harper didn't need to hear every word to understand. She recognized the tone, the too sweet voice Lorraine used when she wanted to poison someone's reputation without anyone noticing the venom. "Oh, he approached Harper in the woods," Lorraine murmured. "Poor girl was frightened. I just hope he isn't unstable." Harper stiffened. Unstable, Evan had helped her. Why was he being punished for caring? That evening, Evan tried once more to push the unease aside and focus on work. But when he stepped outside to lock up the shop, he noticed something chilling. Deep scratches across his motorcycle's paint. Fresh, intentional. Someone had been there. Someone wanted him to feel watched. Part of him knew exactly who could influence something like this without leaving fingerprints or accountability. But Lorraine Whitmore didn't need to touch a thing herself. People obeyed her without question. Across town, as darkness settled over the estate, Harper stood at her bedroom window. She saw Evan ride past the hill road, his headlights cutting through the fog. She pressed her hand to the glass, wishing she could say something, anything, to warn him. Lorraine had been colder all day, more calculating. Harper sensed that Evan had crossed some invisible line, and Lorraine never forgave those who did. Harper whispered into the night, "Please don't give up." Down on the road, Evan felt a prickle at the back of his neck. He didn't know why, but he sensed he was running out of time to help Harper. And the next morning, he would discover a clue left by Harper herself. Small, desperate, and impossible to ignore. The next morning, Evan arrived at his shop early, hoping a garage full of work would keep his mind steady. But the moment he stepped inside, something unusual caught his eye. A small envelope slid halfway under the door. No name, no stamp, just a child's handwriting on the front. For the man with the motorcycle. His stomach tightened. He tore it open carefully. Inside was a folded napkin with faint crayon marks, a shaky drawing of a house, a small figure, a larger figure towering above, and in the corner, dark scribbles surrounding a tiny stick figure curled up alone. Underneath, in uneven letters, it read, "Help me." Evan sat down hard on a stool. The note wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It was the quiet desperation of a child who had run out of safe options. Harper had reached out, even if only with crayons. He swallowed, anger and fear twisting in his chest. This was no longer a question of suspicion. Harper was calling for help. And if a girl that terrified found the courage to slip a note under his door, he couldn't ignore it. But he had to be careful, very careful. While Evan studied the drawing, across town, Harper sat stiffly at the breakfast table, pushing cereal around her bowl. Lorraine's voice floated through the kitchen as she spoke on the phone again, this time sharper. "Yes, I need to know who's been speaking to that mechanic," she said, irritation bleeding through her calm tone. "Find out if he's been asking questions. I won't have rumors starting." Harper froze. She didn't dare look up. She didn't dare breathe too loudly. Lorraine hung up and walked over. She placed a manicured hand on Harper's shoulder, not gently. "You haven't said anything to anyone, right?" Harper shook her head instantly, her heart hammered. Did Lorraine know about the note? Lorraine studied her for a moment, then sighed in that disappointed way that always made Harper feel smaller. Good, your father can't deal with nonsense while he's traveling. That afternoon, Evan drove toward the Whitmore estate again. This time, not to confront, but to observe. He needed evidence, something solid enough to force others to listen. But as he slowed near the back fence, he saw a familiar figure, Harper, standing by her bedroom window. She lifted her hand, pressing it to the glass, a tiny gesture, but to Evan, it felt like a cry louder than the one he'd heard in the woods. He raised his hand in return. Before she could respond, the curtain snapped shut from inside. Evan exhaled shakily. That single moment confirmed everything. Harper wasn't just scared. She was trapped. And before the day ended, Evan would discover just how far Lorraine was willing to go to keep her secret buried. Evan wasn't sure whether he should go to the Whitmore estate again so soon, but the drawing Harper left made it impossible for him to stay away. He didn't have a plan, just a growing sense of urgency twisting in his gut. By late afternoon, he found himself at the local supermarket, grabbing a few supplies, still trying to think through his next steps. That's when he heard a small, familiar voice behind him. "Mr. Carter?" He turned. Harper stood at the end of the aisle, holding a basket much too big for her. She looked startled to see him, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice she existed. Her sweater sleeves nearly swallowed her hands, and she kept glancing over her shoulder. "Harper," Evan asked gently, "are you alone?" She shook her head quickly. "Lorraine is around." Her voice trembled on the last word. Evan crouched slightly, not too close. He didn't want to frighten her. "Hey, I got your note." Harper's eyes widened, fear first, then a tiny flicker of relief. "I didn't think anyone would read it." "I did," Evan said softly, "and I believe you." For a moment, Harper looked like she might cry, but she swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together. "She gets worse when Dad's gone," she whispered. "She says I make problems, that I need to learn to behave." Evan clenched his jaw. He wanted to ask more, but he saw Harper's eyes suddenly shift past him, her body stiffening. Lorraine's voice floated over the aisle like a blade covered in honey. "There you are, Harper. I was wondering what was taking you so long." Harper instantly dropped her gaze to the floor. Lorraine turned her attention to Evan, her smile smooth and practiced. "Mr. Carter, how interesting that we keep running into each other." "Harper was just saying hi," Evan replied evenly. "Was she?" Lorraine brushed Harper's shoulder lightly, though the girl flinched. "I do hope you're not filling my stepdaughter's head with nonsense. Children are impressionable." Evan didn't back down. "No nonsense, just concern." Lorraine's smile sharpened. "Concern is only admirable when it's appropriate, and you, Mr. Carter, are becoming intrusive." Harper's breathing quickened. Lorraine leaned in slightly, voice low enough that only Evan could hear. "Walk away before you make things difficult for yourself." Then she took Harper's hand, not gently, and guided her cart toward the checkout. Harper glanced back once, eyes pleading. Evan stood rooted in place, watching them disappear down the aisle. Lorraine had crossed a line. She wasn't hiding her hostility anymore. And as Evan stepped outside the store, he realized someone was watching him from a parked car. Someone who didn't want him near the Whitmore family at all. When Evan stepped out of the supermarket, the late afternoon light felt colder than before. He scanned the parking lot, trying to shake off the sense of being watched. That's when he noticed a black sedan with tinted windows parked 2 rows away. The engine was running, but the driver wasn't getting out. Evan couldn't see the face behind the glass, only the silhouette of someone staring straight at him. He took a step forward. The sedan rolled slowly out of the lot. Not fast, not fleeing, just leaving a message. Evan exhaled, feeling tension knot at the base of his neck. Lorraine had influence, resources, and a reputation to protect. If she wanted to intimidate him, she didn't need to do it herself. She just had to make a few calls. Back inside the Whitmore home, Lorraine guided Harper through the kitchen, her smile gone the moment the door shut behind them. She didn't shout. Her anger was quieter, controlled, sharp-edged. "What did you say to him?" she asked. Harper's throat tightened. Nothing. I only said hello." Lorraine crouched so her eyes were level with Harper's. The closeness felt suffocating. "You know better than to talk to strangers, especially that man." He's not— Harper stopped herself. She sensed the danger in finishing that sentence. Lorraine stood up, smoothing her dress. "Your father comes home tomorrow. I expect you to behave. No tears, no stories, no dramatics. Understood?" Harper nodded quickly. Meanwhile, Evan drove back to his shop, replaying the encounter over and over. Harper's trembling voice, her plea for help, Lorraine's veiled threats, the black sedan watching him. Every piece pointed to the same truth. Harper was running out of time. He decided he needed advice, someone who understood children, someone who could guide him legally without causing more harm. He drove to Cedar Valley Elementary just as school was letting out. The teacher he'd spoken to once before, Melissa James, was walking to her car. "Miss James," Evan called out. She paused, surprised. "Mr. Carter, everything okay?" "No," he said honestly. "I think Harper's in real trouble." Melissa's face softened with concern instantly. She admitted she'd suspected something for months. Harper's withdrawn behavior, unexplained nervousness, the way she flinched at sudden sounds. But every time she tried raising concerns, the administration backed off. "It's the Whitmore family," they'd said. "Be careful with assumptions." But Melissa didn't care about the Whitmore name anymore. "If Harper reached out to you," she said, "it means she trusts you. That's rare for a child who's scared." They agreed to meet the next day to discuss what steps could be taken. As Evan walked back to his truck, he didn't notice the same black sedan parked across the street. Engine quiet now, window cracked just enough for a camera lens to peek through. Someone was tracking him, and the photo they snapped would soon find its way to Lorraine, giving her exactly what she needed to escalate the fight. Charles Whitmore returned home earlier than planned. His business trip was cut short due to a canceled meeting, and he walked through the front door carrying gifts for Harper, expecting her to run to him like she used to when she was little. But instead, Harper appeared at the top of the stairs quietly, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether she was allowed to show emotion. "Hey, sweetheart," Charles called, smiling up at her. Harper managed a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Lorraine appeared behind Charles, gliding into the foyer with perfect timing. "We missed you," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Dinner will be ready soon." Charles turned back to Harper. "How's my girl?" he asked warmly. Harper opened her mouth to speak, but Lorraine placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her down the stairs. "She's been emotional lately," Lorraine said with a light laugh. "You know how kids are, overly sensitive." Harper's shoulders tensed. Later that evening, while Harper quietly ate her food, Lorraine pulled Charles aside and handed him her phone. "I'm worried," she said softly. "Look at this." On the screen were photos of Evan outside Cedar Valley Elementary, apparently talking intensely with a teacher. In another, he was glancing around the parking lot, making the conversation look secretive. Charles frowned. "What is this?" "I don't know," Lorraine whispered, pretending concern. "But Harper's been anxious, and this man keeps showing up wherever she is. I'm afraid he might be fixated." That single word, fixated, landed exactly where she wanted it to. Charles straightened, protective instinct kicking in. "Has he talked to Harper again?" Lorraine offered a carefully timed pause. "I didn't want to alarm you, but yes, twice. I handled it, of course." Handled it, meaning she intimidated both of them. Charles exhaled sharply. "I'll deal with him." Meanwhile, Harper sat alone at the dining table, listening to the muffled conversation behind the wall. She heard her father's voice, tense, worried, but she knew that worry wasn't aimed at the real danger. Lorraine's lies were spreading like vines, wrapping tighter around everything. Upstairs later that night, Charles tucked Harper into bed. "If anyone bothers you," he said gently, "you tell me, okay?" Harper hesitated. Her small hands clutched the blanket. There were 100 truths she wanted to say, but Lorraine stood in the hallway watching. So Harper whispered, "Okay." Charles kissed her forehead and left the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, Lorraine stepped inside, her voice low and controlled. "Remember what happens if you make trouble," she murmured. Harper's breath hitched. Downstairs, Charles poured himself a drink, unaware of the storm inside his own home, unaware that Lorraine had just turned him into a weapon against the one man trying to save his daughter. And the next morning, Charles would show up at Evan's shop with a warning that could change everything. The annual Cedar Valley Charity Gala was the most anticipated event of the year, an evening dripping with luxury, polished smiles, and carefully constructed reputations. It was held at the Heritage Hall, a glass-walled venue overlooking the lake. People dressed their best, spoke their softest, and pretended the world inside those walls was perfect. No family embodied that illusion more than the Whitmores. Lorraine arrived in a midnight blue gown, flawless from hair to heels. Charles escorted her proudly, oblivious to the tension radiating beneath her smile. Harper walked slightly behind them, wearing a pale dress that looked delicate on her small frame. But her face was expressionless, her steps slow, as if she'd learned to make herself invisible even in a crowd. "Smile for the cameras," Lorraine murmured through her teeth, tightening her grip on Harper's wrist. Harper obeyed. Inside the hall, admiration flowed toward the Whitmores like warm wind. Guests praised Lorraine's elegance, Charles's generosity, and Harper's sweet shyness. Nobody noticed the way Harper flinched at sudden sounds. Nobody questioned the stiffness in her posture. Nobody looked closely enough. Meanwhile, across town, Evan was preparing to close up his shop for the night when an envelope slid under the front door. He frowned, picking it up. Inside was a single gala invitation card, gold-embossed, official, unmistakable. Below the printed details was a handwritten note. "You need to be there. MJ. Melissa James." Evan stared at the card for a long moment. He wasn't the gala type. He didn't own a suit. But something in his chest tightened. The same feeling he'd had when first finding Harper alone in the woods. If someone was urging him to show up, there had to be a reason. An hour later, wearing the closest thing he owned to formal clothing, Evan stepped into Heritage Hall. Eyes followed him. He didn't belong among the glittering chandeliers and string quartet music, but he wasn't here for them. He scanned the room until he found Harper. She spotted him too. A flicker of hope crossed her face before she looked down quickly, afraid Lorraine might notice. The sight made Evan's jaw clench. Melissa appeared beside him. "I have a bad feeling tonight," she whispered. "Harper looks worse than ever, and Lorraine's been unusually tense." Evan nodded, gaze fixed on the little girl standing alone near the staircase. Suddenly, Harper glanced up again, this time with a silent plea in her eyes, fragile but unmistakable. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and Evan knew he could no longer just observe, not tonight. Because before the gala ended, he would confront Lorraine in front of everyone, and the fallout would rock Cedar Valley to its core. Evan stood near the back of the grand hall, every muscle tight, watching Harper from across the room. The string quartet played softly, guests clinked glasses, and laughter drifted through the air like perfume. But underneath the glamour, something felt dangerously fragile, ready to shatter. Harper stood by the staircase, hands clasped in front of her, eyes darting around as if searching for a safe place that didn't exist. Lorraine floated from group to group, greeting donors, accepting compliments, performing her role flawlessly. Yet every so often, her gaze flicked toward Harper, quick, sharp monitoring. Melissa nudged Evan lightly. "If you're going to say something, you need to choose the right moment." "There is no right moment for this," Evan muttered, "but there sure as hell is a wrong one, and that's waiting any longer." He took a breath, steadying himself, and moved through the crowd. People parted, startled by the presence of someone who clearly didn't fit the gala's polished mold. Evan wasn't trying to be dramatic. He just had no intention of failing Harper tonight. Charles noticed him first. "What is he doing here?" he murmured to Lorraine. Lorraine turned, her practiced smile faltering for half a second. "I didn't invite him." "Then who did?" But Evan didn't give them time to strategize. He walked straight toward Harper and crouched just enough so he wasn't towering over her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Harper's lips trembled. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Lorraine appeared beside them instantly, her smile sharp. "Mr. Carter, how unexpected to see you here." Evan rose slowly. "I need to ask you something." "This is hardly the place," Charles began. "No," Evan cut in, his voice steady but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Actually, this is exactly the place." The room cooled, conversations paused. A few curious faces turned their way. Lorraine's jaw tightened. "Lower your voice." Evan didn't. "Why is Harper always scared around you? A ripple went through the crowd, soft gasps, murmurs, shifting footsteps. Harper froze, eyes wide. Lorraine's mask cracked, just slightly, but enough for Evan to see the fury behind it. "But that is an outrageous accusation," she hissed. "Then tell everyone here why your stepdaughter begged me not to let you take her home." Silence dropped like a stone. Charles stared between them, confused, shaken. Guests whispered. Melissa stepped closer, ready if Harper needed protection. Lorraine's face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with rage she could no longer hide. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then explain the note she left for me," Evan said. "Explain why she hides behind doors. Explain why she looks like she wants to disappear." Harper's breath hitched. Every eye in the hall was now on them. And just when Lorraine opened her mouth to strike back, someone else stepped forward. Someone Evan didn't expect to defend Harper. For a heartbeat, no one in the gala moved. The chandelier lights glittered above like they were waiting for the truth to fall. Lorraine stood rigid, her mask cracking inch by inch. Harper looked trapped between wanting to vanish and wanting someone, anyone, to finally take her side. Then a clear voice broke the tension. "I need to say something." Melissa James stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, but determination burning in her eyes. The crowd shifted, recognizing her as Harper's teacher. Lorraine's expression flickered from annoyance to alarm. Miss James," Lorraine said sharply, "this is not the time." "It's exactly the time," Melissa said, louder. "I've watched Harper for months. She's afraid. She flinches at sounds that shouldn't scare a child. She withdraws when adults approach. And every time I tried to bring it up, I was told to remember who her family is." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Charles stared at Melissa, stunned. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying something is wrong," Melissa replied. "Very wrong. And Harper has been trying to tell us in the only ways she can." Lorraine stepped forward, fury boiling behind her forced smile. "How dare you imply such a thing about me? You know nothing about our home." "Maybe not," Melissa countered, "but I know children, and Harper is terrified." Harper's breath shook. She looked from Melissa to Evan, eyes filling with something fragile. Hope. Another voice rose from the back. "I've seen bruises." Everyone turned. It was Dr. Patel, a pediatric nurse who occasionally worked school health checks. She stepped into the circle of attention, voice steady. "I noticed marks on Harper several times." Lorraine explained them away, but the patterns, they were concerning. Lorraine's composure snapped for a second. "This is outrageous! You people are twisting normal childhood scrapes into—" "It's not normal," Dr. Patel interrupted softly. "And neither is a child who avoids eye contact, avoids touch, avoids speaking unless spoken to." More whispers surged. Faces shifted from admiration to suspicion. Lorraine realized she was losing control. She grabbed Harper's arm a little too tightly. "We are leaving." Harper winced. That was all it took. Evan stepped forward. "Let her go!" Charles finally reacted, stepping between Evan and Lorraine. "What is going on? Lorraine, why does our daughter look like she's terrified of you?" "I've done nothing wrong," Lorraine snapped. She's sensitive, emotional, easily confused. But Harper's small voice trembled through the hall. "I'm not confused." The room fell silent. Lorraine froze, staring at Harper like she couldn't believe the girl had spoken against her. Harper took a shaky breath, and for the first time she didn't look at the floor. "Don't make me go home with her." Gasps exploded around the room, and in that instant, Lorraine realized her control over Harper and over the entire town was slipping faster than she could grab it. But her next move would be even more explosive. For a long, breathless moment, Harper's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Guests stood frozen with champagne glasses paused midway, eyes wide, unsure whether they had truly heard what they thought they heard. A child, the Whitmore child, had just begged not to go home with her stepmother in front of the entire town. Lorraine felt the floor tilt beneath her. Her perfect world, crafted with elegance, fear, and manipulation, was cracking open. "Harper," she said, voice trembling with forced calm, "you're overwhelmed. You don't know what you're saying." Harper shook her head. It was small, but it was enough. Something inside Lorraine snapped. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed, no longer hiding the venom. "After everything I've done for you." "Lorraine!" Charles stepped toward her, shocked. "What are you doing?" But Lorraine didn't even hear him. Years of pent-up control, frustration, and resentment poured out. Her mask had shattered too completely to rebuild in time. "She lies!" Lorraine shouted, pointing at Harper with a shaking hand. "She always lies. She exaggerates everything to get attention. She's been trouble since the day I married into this family." Gasps rippled through the hall. Harper flinched. Everyone saw it. Charles stared at Lorraine as if seeing her for the first time. "Why would you speak to her like that? What's wrong with you?" Lorraine turned on him. "What's wrong with me? I've raised your child for years while you've been flying around the country. I've carried this household, protected our reputation. And now you're taking the side of a mechanic and a frightened little girl who twists stories?" Evan stepped forward. "Nobody here is twisting anything." "Stay out of this!" Lorraine screamed, losing the last shred of her composure. "You're nothing. You don't belong anywhere near my family." Her voice echoed off the marble walls. Guests stared, horrified, but Lorraine hadn't realized the full extent of her mistake. Not yet, because Harper wasn't the only witness to her outburst. Phones were out, cameras were recording. Every word, every gesture of anger, every crack in her fake smile captured. Lorraine finally noticed the phones. Her face drained of color. "This isn't real," she whispered. "Stop recording, stop recording." But it was too late. Her reputation, the thing she valued more than anything, was unraveling in real time. Harper took a shaky step back toward Evan and Melissa, toward safety. Lorraine lunged forward, panic replacing anger. "Harper, get back here!" Charles grabbed her arm, horrified. "Enough!" Lorraine stared at him, stunned, betrayed, her world collapsing. And that was the moment the doors to the gala swung open, as someone arrived with proof that would destroy Lorraine completely. The grand doors of Heritage Hall burst open, and the sudden gust of cold night air swept through the gala. Conversations that had started to rise again died instantly. Heads turned, phones stayed up. Lorraine froze, still being held back by Charles, her breath sharp and erratic. Standing in the doorway was Officer Grayson, one of Cedar Valley's most respected police officers, and behind him, a woman holding a small digital recorder. Her face was pale but determined. It was Mrs. Alden, the Whitmores' former housekeeper. Lorraine's eyes widened with something close to dread. Mrs. Alden walked forward slowly, each step echoing across the marble floor. "I didn't want to come back here," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "But someone needs to speak for Harper." Lorraine's composure snapped dangerously. "You're a disgruntled employee. You were fired for negligence. Nothing you say is credible." "I wasn't fired for negligence," Mrs. Alden replied evenly. "I was fired because I wouldn't stay silent about what I heard in that house." The guests buzzed with whispers. Officer Grayson stepped aside to let her continue. Harper instinctively moved closer to Evan and Melissa, her small body shaking. Mrs. Alden lifted the recorder. "This contains moments I captured when Harper was locked in her room. Moments Lorraine thought nobody knew." "No," Lorraine breathed, suddenly panicked. "That's illegal. You can't—" "It's admissible when a child's safety is at risk," Officer Grayson cut in. His voice was calm but firm. "Go ahead, Mrs. Alden." She pressed play. A crackle of static filled the hall before a faint, terrified voice emerged. Harper's voice. "Please, I'll be good. Don't lock me in again. It's dark. Please." The room froze. Then came another voice. Cold, controlling, horrifyingly familiar. Lorraine's. "You stay in there until you learn to stop embarrassing me." Gasps erupted. Some guests covered their mouths. Others looked away, ashamed that they'd ever admired the woman now unraveling before them. Lorraine lunged forward. "Turn that off! You don't understand!" Officer Grayson stepped between her and Mrs. Alden. "Ma'am, that's enough." But the recording wasn't over. Harper sobbed through the speakers. "I'm scared. Please don't leave me." Then silence. The kind of silence that stabbed straight into every heart in the room. Lorraine's knees buckled. "This is taken out of context." "There is no context," Charles whispered, horrified. His face was ashen, his hands trembling. "Lorraine, what have you done?" Harper's eyes filled with tears she'd held back for years. Lorraine, seeing her power slipping entirely, looked around wildly for an escape, for someone to defend her, for anything. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And as Officer Grayson reached for his handcuffs, Lorraine realized the world she'd built on fear and lies had finally collapsed. The hall remained in stunned silence as Officer Grayson stepped forward, the steel of the handcuffs glinting under the chandelier. Lorraine staggered backward, her face drained of color, her pupils darting around the room, searching desperately for someone, anyone who still believed her. But all she saw were horrified expressions, shaken heads, and the widening gap of people stepping away from her. No, this is a mistake," she choked out, her voice cracking. "Charles, tell them I would never—" Charles didn't move. For the first time in years, he was seeing his wife clearly. Not the elegant hostess, not the respected social figure, not the polished reflection she presented to the world, just the woman who had been breaking his daughter piece by piece while he was gone. "Lorraine," he whispered, voice unsteady. "That was Harper's voice, our daughter's voice. How could you?" Lorraine backed away as if his words physically struck her. "I did what needed to be done. She was disobedient, emotional, impossible to manage. Someone had to keep her in line." "That wasn't discipline," Melissa said sharply, stepping protectively in front of Harper. "That was cruelty." Every camera in the room captured Lorraine's unraveling. Her hair, once perfectly styled, now fell out of place, her mascara smudged. Her breath came fast and uneven. The polished woman who ruled Cedar Valley with charm and intimidation was gone, revealing the frightened, furious person beneath. Officer Grayson approached her slowly. "Lorraine Whitmore, you are being detained for further questioning regarding the mistreatment and endangerment of a minor." "No!" Lorraine screamed, twisting away. "You can't do this! I gave this town everything. I hosted fundraisers. I built reputations. "You terrorized a child," Evan cut in. "Your stepdaughter, and you hid behind money and status to get away with it?" Lorraine spun toward him, eyes wild. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You ruined everything. You think you're a hero? You're nothing." Evan didn't flinch. "Harper thinks differently." That single sentence hit Lorraine harder than any accusation. Harper peeked out from behind Melissa, tears streaking her cheeks, but her chin lifted bravely. The moment their eyes met, Lorraine froze. Not in fear, but in the realization that she no longer had control over the one person she dominated for years. "Harper," she whispered, reaching out. "Don't let them take me. Tell them—" Harper stepped back. Charles gently pulled his daughter into his arms, shielding her. Harper buried her face into his suit jacket, clinging to him as though she finally had permission to feel safe. Lorraine's last thread of power snapped. Officer Grayson secured the cuffs around her wrists. As he led her toward the exit, the crowd parted in absolute silence. No sympathy, no support, nothing left for her to manipulate. But as the doors closed behind her, a new fear settled over the room. If Lorraine's cruelty had been hidden for this long, what else had been buried inside the Whitmore home? As the heavy doors shut behind Lorraine, a long, trembling silence filled the hall, one that felt too big for an 8-year-old girl to stand in. Harper clung tightly to Charles's jacket, her small body shaking against him. Charles held her awkwardly at first, almost as if realizing, maybe for the very first time, just how light and fragile she was in his arms. "Sweetheart, I'm here," he whispered. But Harper didn't respond. She wasn't sure if she trusted those words yet. Melissa knelt beside them. "Harper, you're safe now," she said gently. But Harper didn't feel safe. Not yet. Not when she had spent years learning that safety could vanish the moment a door closed. Not when every mistake, real or imagined, had consequences waiting. Evan stood a few feet away, unsure whether to approach. He didn't want to overwhelm her, but Harper turned her head just slightly, tears clinging to her lashes, looking toward him. That was enough. He stepped closer. "Hey," he said softly, "you did something really brave tonight." Harper's chin quivered. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice barely a breath. "I didn't mean to make trouble." Evan's heart twisted. "You didn't make trouble. Lorraine did." Charles swallowed hard at that, guilt washing over him. He had been so absent, so trusting of appearances, that he never saw what was happening right under his own roof. "Harper," he said gently, kneeling now to meet her eyes, "why didn't you tell me?" Harper hesitated. Tears welled again. "Because she said you wouldn't believe me," she whispered. "She said you'd send me away." Charles's face crumpled. "Oh, sweetheart, I would never send you away." "But you weren't here," Harper said quietly, her voice trembling with a truth that stabbed straight into him. Charles couldn't answer, because she was right. At that moment, Officer Grayson approached. "Mr. Whitmore, we're going to need a statement from you soon. But first, Harper should be evaluated by a child specialist. It's routine, nothing frightening, and she won't be alone." Harper pressed closer to Charles, shrinking again. Evan spoke, careful, steady. "Harper, if you want, I can walk with you, just until you feel okay." Harper hesitated, but then nodded, small but certain. Melissa offered her hand too. "You don't have to go through anything alone anymore." For the first time that night, Harper didn't look terrified, just exhausted, like a child finally letting go of a weight she'd been carrying far too long. As they began to escort her toward the exit, Charles followed behind, shaken, remorseful, struggling to understand the pieces of his daughter's life he'd missed. But Harper paused at the door, looking back at the glittering hall, the place where her truth finally came out. What she didn't know was that while her story had begun to find light, Lorraine's influence wasn't gone, and the aftermath was only beginning. The morning after the gala, Cedar Valley woke to a different reality. For years, the Whitmore family name had shielded everything behind its iron gates. But now, the truth spread through town like a storm no one could ignore. News outlets replayed the recording, social media filled with posts questioning how such cruelty could stay hidden for so long. And for the first time, people who once whispered in fear began speaking openly. At the police station, Harper sat between Melissa and Evan while a child specialist gently asked questions. She didn't have to tell every detail. She only needed to confirm what she felt comfortable saying. Her small voice trembled, but she didn't shut down like she would have before. With Evan beside her, she took tiny steps toward truth. Charles gave his statement separately. Shame weighed heavily on him. He admitted he'd been blind, too focused on work, too trusting of Lorraine's excuses. "I should have protected my daughter," he said quietly. "I should have seen it." His hands shook as he signed the paperwork. Meanwhile, investigators swarmed the Whitmore estate. Rooms once pristine with curated perfection were now being photographed, documented, examined. The police found the small storage room where Harper had been locked, its walls bare, its light switch placed too high for a child to reach. A folded blanket lay in the corner. A faint scratch on the door showed where tiny fingernails had scraped. Evidence began to grow. Neighbors who had remained silent for years finally stepped forward. One recalled seeing Harper outside late at night without a coat. Another remembered muffled cries but assumed they were nightmares. Each confession added weight to the case. Officer Grayson returned to the station with updates, nodding at Evan. "You were right to follow your instincts," he said. "This could have gone unnoticed for much longer." Evan didn't feel triumphant. He just felt relief. Relief that Harper was no longer invisible. Harper, sitting quietly on the bench, pulled the sleeves of her sweater over her hands. "Am I going home?" she asked, eyes flicking toward Charles. He knelt in front of her. "You're not going anywhere unsafe," he promised. "You'll stay with someone who cares about you, someone who wouldn't hurt you." Harper looked between him and Evan. Can I see you again?" she asked Evan softly. "Anytime you want," he said. As Harper leaned against Melissa's shoulder, letting herself breathe, Officer Grayson approached Charles. "There's more we need to discuss," a hint of seriousness in his tone. "Because what we found in the house suggests this has been happening far longer than anyone expected." Charles paled. Evan stiffened. The room felt colder. Harper wasn't just a victim of recent cruelty. She had been surviving a nightmare far deeper than anyone realized, and the investigation was about to uncover the darkest pieces of it. That evening, Harper sat curled up on a bench inside the Child Advocacy Center, a quiet, softly lit room meant to ease the fear of kids in crisis. She clutched a small blanket they'd given her, the fabric worn from the many children who had needed comfort before her. Melissa sat beside her, humming gently while Evan waited nearby, pretending to look through a magazine but keeping his eyes on Harper every few seconds. Charles paced the hallway outside. He had just finished speaking with a social worker, a woman named Dana, who specialized in emergency placements. Her tone was kind, but the weight of her words had hit him hard. Harper couldn't return home. Not now, not until the investigation was over. and not if it meant exposing her to more trauma. "I failed her," Charles whispered, pressing a hand over his forehead. Dana softened. "You were misled. Abuse thrives in silence. What matters now is protecting her." They discussed relatives, friends, and possible safe placements. Finally, they found the best option: Harper's aunt, Lily Morgan, her late mother's younger sister. She lived 2 towns over, worked as a nurse, and had already responded to the call with overwhelming concern. "I'll take her tonight if needed," Lily had said. "Just keep her safe." When Charles re-entered the room, Harper looked up timidly. He knelt in front of her, trying to steady his voice. "Harper, sweetheart, you're going to stay with Aunt Lily for a little while." Harper blinked. "Is she nice?" "She loved your mom very much," Charles said softly. "And she loves you, too. She's already getting your room ready." Harper hesitated, then whispered, Will you come visit me?" Charles's eyes filled with regret and determination. "Every chance I get." Evan stepped forward. "And I'll be around, too, if you want," he added gently. Harper nodded, gripping her blanket a little tighter. But this time not from fear, from comfort. An hour later, Lily arrived, breathless, emotional, arms opening the moment she saw Harper. "Oh, honey," she murmured, hugging the girl close. "You're safe now. I've got you." For the first time in what felt like years, Harper leaned into an embrace without flinching. As they prepared to leave, Harper looked back at Evan. "Thank you," she whispered. Evan smiled. "You don't have to thank me." But Harper shook her head. "If you hadn't heard me, I'd still be there." Charles placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness for himself. He hadn't earned that yet, but it was gratitude. Lily led Harper out into the cool night air, her arms protectively around her. And as Evan watched the car pull away, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet resolve. Lorraine might be gone, but there were still pieces of Harper's past the investigators hadn't uncovered, and Evan wasn't ready to stop fighting for her just yet. In the weeks that followed, Cedar Valley slowly adjusted to its new reality. For the first time in years, people looked past the Whitmore name and began acknowledging the truth behind the perfect facade. Investigations continued, interviews were held, and the town whispered not out of fear, but out of awakening. For Evan, life returned to a rhythm, but not the same one he'd known before. His motorcycle shop, once avoided after Lorraine's smear campaign, suddenly saw a rush of customers. People apologized for doubting him. Some brought coffee, others brought business, and all thanked him for stepping up when everyone else stayed silent. But Evan didn't care about the attention. He cared about Harper. Every few days he drove to Lily Morgan's home, an old, warm, yellow house with flower pots and wind chimes that jingled softly in the breeze. Harper would wait on the porch, wrapped in a blanket or holding a sketchbook. She smiled more now, not wide, carefree smiles, but small, cautious ones that hinted at healing. "Look," she said one afternoon, handing Evan a drawing. It was of 3 figures under a large tree, Harper, Lily, and Evan. Beneath them was a short message in uneven handwriting. "Safe now." Evan swallowed the lump in his throat. "You're getting good," he said, admiring the drawing. "That's Aunt Lily's tree," Harper explained. "She says when the wind blows, it sounds like singing." "And does it?" Harper nodded. "It sounds like someone telling me everything will be okay." Lily stepped onto the porch, smiling gently. "She sleeps through the night now," she told Evan quietly. "No nightmares this week." It was the first time Harper had gone that long without waking up shaking. Charles visited often too, slowly rebuilding the bond he'd unknowingly neglected. He attended therapy sessions, sat through interviews, and apologized until words didn't feel enough anymore. But Harper let him in, small steps, small moments, forgiving him piece by piece. One evening, Lily invited Evan and Charles for dinner. Harper insisted on setting the table herself. As they ate, she talked about school, about Melissa's encouragement, about the new kitten Lily had adopted for her. Halfway through the meal, Harper glanced at Evan. "Do you think my mom sees me?" she asked softly. Evan smiled gently. "I think she saw you the moment you were brave enough to ask for help." Harper looked down at her plate, cheeks warming. "I'm not brave." "You are," Evan said, "because you let someone hear you." And for the first time, Harper didn't deny it. As Evan walked to his truck later that night, Lily caught up to him. "You changed her life," she said. "You should know that." Evan looked back at the warm yellow house, at Harper waving from the porch. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone finally making things right. But tomorrow would bring the final reckoning, the day Lorraine faced the full weight of her actions. And Cedar Valley witnessed justice served. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. Reporters, townspeople, former supporters of the Whitmore family now standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the verdict that would define Cedar Valley for years to come. For once, the town wasn't hiding behind polite silence. They wanted justice, they wanted truth, and they wanted accountability, no matter how powerful the person on trial once was. Inside the courtroom, Evan sat beside Lily and Harper. Harper leaned gently against Lily's side, her small fingers gripping a stuffed kitten she'd brought for comfort. She wasn't trembling today. Her breathing was calm, steady. She was still healing, but she wasn't afraid to be seen anymore. Charles sat a few seats away, wearing a suit that looked heavier on him than any business attire ever had. He had come to every hearing, every interview, every appointment, determined to show the court and himself that he was done being blind. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Lorraine Whitmore, hands cuffed, was escorted to the front. Her once perfect appearance was gone. Her hair was tangled, her expression hollow. She didn't look elegant or powerful or untouchable anymore. She looked small, trapped, exposed. The judge reviewed the findings, witness statements, professional evaluations, the recorded audio, and months of documented patterns of mistreatment. The courtroom remained silent save for the sound of papers turning. Harper squeezed Lily's hand. Finally, the verdict was spoken. Guilty. Every count. Lorraine's head dropped as the sentencing followed. Years of supervised rehabilitation and strict restrictions, including zero contact with Harper. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply sat there, defeated by the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. Harper watched quietly, and then she whispered, almost to herself, "It's over." Outside, as officers escorted Lorraine to the transport vehicle, the townspeople parted, not in admiration this time, but in solemn acknowledgement that justice had been long overdue. Lorraine didn't look up. She couldn't face the people who once praised her, or the girl she could no longer control. Evan lifted Harper into his arms so she could see over the crowd. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on, not in fear, but in gratitude. "You heard me," she said softly, "when nobody else did." "I always will," Evan replied. Lily placed a hand on Harper's back. "Let's go home," she said with a gentle smile. As they walked away from the courthouse, Evan beside them, Charles following with humility and hope, the winter sun broke through the clouds, warming the cold stone steps behind them. Cedar Valley wasn't the same anymore. It was better. And Harper, now free and surrounded by people who truly loved her, finally had what every child deserved: a safe home, a future full of possibility, and the knowledge that even in her darkest moment, a stranger had cared enough to step forward. And that single act of kindness had changed her life forever. So, that's our story. And if you're still here with me right now, my friend, then something in Harper's journey must have touched your heart in a real way. Maybe it reminded you that sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest pain. Maybe it made you realize, as the Stoics often said, that what stands in the way becomes the way. Evan didn't choose to be a hero, but he chose to listen. And that simple act became the path that changed everything. What can we take from this? That kindness isn't weakness, that paying attention can save someone, and that healing begins the moment someone finally says, "I hear you." Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Tonight, let your thoughts lean toward compassion, toward being the person who notices, who cares, who steps forward instead of stepping away. If this story moved you even a little, then please like, share, and subscribe. It helps these messages reach more people who might need a reminder that goodness still matters. And hey, thank you for staying with us until the very end. It means more than you know.